The church bells were rehearsing their calm little song while I sat in my car with my dress laid across the passenger seat like a sleeping animal, its satin catching the last of the morning light. I had planned to walk in at noon to the smell of lilies and furniture polish, and the soft hush people give to rooms full of hope. But the text on my screen flattened the air inside the car. 2 words stared back, "Listen alone." It came from Victor, the friend who introduced me to Daniel, and who never sent cryptic anything. I turned off the engine, and the bells became a faraway reminder that the world hadn't paused just because my hands had gone cold. A voice note waited beneath the text, 3 minutes and some seconds, a small gray rectangle holding something that made my heartbeat stumble. I didn't press play, not yet. The dress rustled when I breathed, as if it knew the aisle ahead had shifted under my feet. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, kitchen porch, or tucked into bed, and if you've ever felt that quiet pull in your chest when something doesn't add up. If this kind of true family story keeps you company, tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Now breathe with me. I did right there in the driver's seat, until my hands could steady enough to hold whatever was waiting. My name is Marina, and I grew up in a house where people worked with their hands and apologized when they were wrong. Mom filed Dewey Decimals and knew the names of every kid who came in after school, looking for a quiet corner. Dad carried his courtroom voice home like a coat he hung by the door, and he taught us to read contracts and faces with the same care. My grandmother stitched hymns at the dining room table, the machine humming like a small engine. And she used to say that greed shows up in a suit and good shoes, but it still squeaks if you listen. We didn't have much for a long time. Then we did, and it surprised us. It came in the form of a careful fund my grandparents set aside for their grandkids, not to make us rich, just to keep us safe. I learned early that love and money can share a room and still step on each other's toes. Daniel walked into my life with burn scars on his wrists from the line and a shy grin that made people tip more than they meant to. He could turn a simple omelet into a reason to forgive the day, and he handled the loud parts of the world for me, reservations, contractors, the chaos that lives in kitchens and crowds. When we got engaged, my parents relaxed in the kind of way you can hear over the phone, the smile in Mom's voice, the relieved silence in Dad's. Daniel's parents clapped me into their family like I'd always been there, and the restaurant staff called me our calm. I was good at being steady. It's not a glamorous talent, but it keeps a lot from cracking. Tessa and I were the kind of sisters who could share a sweater and still argue about its proper home, a tug-of-war braided with laughter, then later sighs. She loved the kind of city nights that made me tired just hearing about them, and sometimes she'd swing by Daniel's place after work to talk marketing menus, seasonal campaigns, the sort of glossy plans I wasn't built to wrangle. They teased each other like cousins who had grown up together quick and sharp, and I let it stand because I had promised myself not to micromanage love. If you hover over a cake, it sinks. So I stepped back, and I called that trust. The weeks before the wedding were little parades of small kindnesses. Victor came over to steam the dress and ended up fixing the sputter in my kitchen faucet while the kettle chirped. My mother cried over the lace my grandmother had sewn into the hem, her thumb rubbing the tiny roses as if blessing each one. Daniel worked late most nights, soft opening at a new location supplier. Headaches, the life of a man trying to stand something sturdy in a shaky industry. When he did make it to the apartment, he'd drop onto my couch like a falling tree and sleep with his arm thrown over his eyes, shoes still on, and I would tug them off and tuck a blanket around him and call that devotion. People said we were solid. I believed them. There were little things, as there always are. He and Tessa snapping at each other at Sunday dinner over nothing, then laughing the next minute like nothing had happened. A private joke that wouldn't translate. The way they both liked to win and treated winning as a sport. It scattered and reassembled harmless as confetti. And I told myself that families create static near big days, that nerves spark and fizz until the match finally lights. If I'm honest, I ignored the way my stomach knotted when I walked into a room and both of them stopped talking. Not because I feared what they would say, but because I didn't want to invite the kind of story that requires you to pick up your life with both hands and start again. I sat in the car, and the dress looked like snow that had fallen in the wrong season. The church lot was filling in around me, pastel dresses, black suits, the rustle of programs, someone's laughter skating across the asphalt, and breaking like glass near my window. Victor's message glowed patient and terrible. Listen alone. I thought about my grandmother's voice, the needle rising and falling, the warning that elegant thieves wear good cologne and smile before they take what isn't theirs. I held the phone, and the bell finished its last note like a period. Then I drew a breath that felt like a line being crossed and pressed my thumb to the voice note as the recording came to life. The moment I pressed play, Daniel's voice filled my car, rough from alcohol, but steady enough to slice me open. After the honeymoon, I'm finished with Marina. Tessa and I already found an apartment. My body went cold. Every word carried a laugh in the background, other men egging him on. He kept going, boasting about how I never suspected how Tuesday nights were theirs while I was at yoga and how easy it would be to fool me until the trust fund unlocked. I gripped the steering wheel until my nails hurt. My own sister's name paired with his was like a knife turned slowly. He spoke about me as if I were a stranger, not the woman he promised to cherish. I could hear Tessa's voice faint in the background, teasing him as if betrayal were entertainment. Their secret, their plan unfolded like a script they'd rehearsed, and all at my expense. By the time the recording ended, my chest felt raw. The church bells were still chiming in the distance, but they sounded like a cruel parody of the vows we were supposed to take. My phone buzzed again. A text from Victor. "I'm sorry, but you needed to know." I stared at his words through blurred vision mascara already streaking down my cheeks. But beneath the sorrow, something harder began to form. I dialed Tessa before I could lose my nerve. The line clicked, and her voice came light and cheerful, as if she hadn't been planning to gut me for months. "Marina, shouldn't you be getting ready?" I swallowed the bitterness in my mouth. "I'm ready. The question is, are you?" Her laughter faltered, nervous at the edges. "What are you talking about?" "I know everything," I said quietly. 6 months? Tuesdays? The apartment. The trust fund. Daniel's voice made it very clear. The silence that followed tightened the air between us. Then came a gasp, her mask slipping. "You wouldn't. I would. And I will. Unless you're the one walking down that aisle today." Her voice cracked with panic. "You're insane." "No," I whispered, letting the steel settle in my words. "Insane is plotting to rob your own sister. Insane is thinking I wouldn't find out. You want him fine. Marry him. Do it in front of everyone." She sputtered something that barely sounded like words, but I cut her off. "You have 30 minutes. Be in the groom's suite. Put on the dress. Or the entire guest list hears Daniel's confession before the ceremony even starts." I hung up before she could answer. My hands trembled, but my resolve stood firm. Through the tinted window of my car, I could see guests beginning to arrive, arms full of envelopes and gifts, smiles ready for a celebration none of them knew was poisoned. The thought of walking into that church as if nothing had happened made my skin crawl. I wasn't going to shield them from the truth. I sat there whispering my grandmother's old warning. Like a prayer, greed always reveals itself at the altar. She had said it half in jest when I was a teenager, but her voice echoed now like prophecy. Today, it would be proven right. I stepped out of the car, straightened my veil, and moved quietly into the back entrance of the church. My body felt numb and electric at the same time. Upstairs, Tessa would be zipped into my gown, the same dress I had chosen with tears in my eyes months ago. Now it clung to her like evidence proof of her choice. Victor found me in a side pew, his face pale. He slid beside me, lowering his voice. "Are you sure about this?" I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded once. His hand brushed mine, steadying without crossing a line. I caught the faint outline of a camera lens hidden in his jacket pocket. He was ready. So was I. The music shifted as the procession began. Bridesmaids walked with practiced smiles, the soft blush of their dresses a backdrop I had once thought would frame my joy. Daniel's groomsmen came next, loud and oblivious, their laughter carrying down the aisle. Then Daniel appeared, dark suit pressed, sharp jawline set with the kind of confidence that once charmed me. His grin spread wide, soaking in admiration like it belonged to him. My stomach clenched. That smile used to feel like home. Now it was poison. The church doors closed, a hush falling over the room. Then they reopened, and there she was, my sister in lace and silk veil pulled low. She walked carefully, bouquet trembling just enough to betray her nerves. Daniel's eyes lit up. He thought it was me. Guests leaned forward, smiles, soft cameras flashing. The priest's voice carried in gentle echoes. "Do you, Daniel Carter, take this woman Marina Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife?" And then came the moment, the one I had been waiting for. Tessa lifted the veil. A wave of shock rolled through the church. Gasps collided with whispers, and Daniel's confident smile shattered. His eyes darted wildly, confusion breaking into horror. "Tessa." "What? Where's Marina?" I rose from my pew in the back, my veil gone, my face uncovered. Every head turned as I walked down the aisle, each step steady, deliberate, like I had rehearsed it all my life. "I'm right here," I said, my voice cutting clean through the noise. The room fell into chaos. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father's jaw locked, guests whispering as phones began to appear in trembling hands. Daniel stumbled backward, his face drained. "This isn't funny. Where is she?" I held up my phone, thumb hovering over the play button. "Should I let everyone hear what you said at your bachelor party? Or would you like to explain why my sister is wearing my dress?" Leah's bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering like broken promises across the floor. Daniel tried to lunge toward me, but I raised my voice calm and clear. "We'll talk now, in front of everyone." And just like that, the empire they had built on lies began to crumble piece by piece under the weight of daylight. The church filled with chaos after my words cut the silence. Guests rose from their seats, voices tumbling over each other, phones lifted to record every second of what was happening. Daniel's parents were pale with confusion, whispering fiercely to each other, while my own parents sat stiff and still, like they had been turned to stone. The petals from Tessa's fallen bouquet scattered under the altar, crushed as feet shifted in panic and disbelief. Daniel turned toward me, his voice breaking between pleading and anger. "We can talk later, Marina. Please not here." He reached forward as if he could reel me back into his control, but I stayed rooted in the aisle, steady under every eye watching. "No," I said loud enough that it carried to the farthest pew. "We'll talk here where everyone can hear the truth." Tessa's face twisted, caught between defiance and fear. She turned on Daniel, her words sharp and too loud. "You promised she'd never find out." His face drained of color and he hissed back through clenched teeth. "You weren't supposed to lift the veil." The argument sparked between them like lightning, their voices rising and colliding, while the priest stood frozen, his prayer book trembling in his hands. My father's voice thundered across the space, the kind of voice that once silenced entire courtrooms. "Enough." The word echoed, bouncing off the stone walls and drawing every gaze to him, but even that couldn't stop the unraveling. My mother's face crumpled as she stared at me, whispering my name like a prayer she didn't know how to finish. I held my phone, higher thumb resting on the play button. I have Daniel's confession right here. Every word about Tuesdays, about the apartment, about the trust fund. A ripple of gasps carried through the rows. Daniel's friends shifted uneasily, suddenly less amused than they had been at the bachelor party where those words were spoken. Daniel's mask slipped, and for the first time I saw him stripped of charm. His smile was gone, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting as if he could still find a way out. "Marina, don't!" he whispered, but the whisper was useless when the whole church was waiting. "You lied. You cheated. And you thought you could rob me while smiling at my family," I said, my voice steady, despite the shaking in my chest. Victor shifted in the pew beside me, his camera light blinking faintly. Across the aisle, one of my bridesmaids angled her phone, recording her face unreadable. Every detail was being captured, the fall of two people who believed they were untouchable. And yet, as the room burned with exposure, I felt a strange kind of quiet forming inside me. I watched Tessa's hand tremble as she tried to hold her veil back down. But the moment was gone. Whispers surged, louder questions and accusations spilling from every corner. Daniel's father pushed forward, demanding an explanation, while Helen covered her face with one hand. The priest closed his book and stepped back from the altar, unwilling to be part of the farce any longer. For a moment, I thought about walking out then and there, leaving them both to claw at the wreckage they created. But I couldn't move. My body was rigid, my dress heavy, the aisle endless before me. My vision blurred as tears welled again, hot and unrelenting. The humiliation pierced deeper than I had imagined, even with the small comfort of control in my hands. I held myself upright, but inside, I was collapsing. Memories of dinners where Daniel sat beside me, squeezing my hand under the table, collided with images of him and Tessa together, while I trusted them both. Every whispered laugh they shared now felt like another betrayal, replayed in front of my eyes. My chest ached with every breath, but I refused to let them see me bend. The shouting swelled, voices overlapping, until the church no longer sounded like a place of vows, but like a courtroom where every person demanded judgment. Guests rose to leave, some shaking their heads, others lingering to witness more of the spectacle. My grandmother sat rigid near the front, her eyes fixed on me, not with pity, but with a quiet strength I clung to. Through the blur, I caught sight of my mother, her lips moving silently. I wondered if she was praying or begging me to stop, but I couldn't tell. My father's eyes burned with fury, not at me, but at the spectacle Daniel and Tessa had dragged our family into. I knew he would not forget this moment, and neither would I. Still, the weight pressed heavier the longer I stood there. The sting of betrayal turned into something slower, deeper. It wasn't just that Daniel had mocked me or that Tessa had stolen behind my back. It was the silence I had accepted for months, the evenings when Daniel claimed exhaustion, the nights Tessa left family dinners early, the glances I had ignored. I realized how blind I had let myself be, and the shame cut nearly as deep as their betrayal. I lowered my hand, not pressing play, not yet. The recording was my shield, but I didn't need to scorch the room further. The truth had already spread, spilling into every corner, impossible to contain. My voice was softer when I spoke again, but it carried just as clearly. You don't get to laugh at me anymore. Not you, Daniel. Not you, Tessa. You've shown everyone who you are. Daniel tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, my body shaking so badly I thought my knees would give. Victor steadied me with his arm, his whisper close to my ear. You don't need to do more. It's done. I nodded faintly, though tears blurred my sight again. I walked out of the church as the noise swirled behind me, my dress dragging like a weight I couldn't carry. Outside, the sunlight hit me too bright sharp against my damp cheeks. Guests spilled out behind me, their chatter following like a tide, but I kept moving. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling so hard that I dropped the keys twice before I managed to unlock the door. I slid inside, closing it quickly, the quiet a shock after the storm I had just left. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me, black streaks down my face, lips, pale eyes, hollow. I looked like a woman who had walked out of her own funeral. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and let the tears fall freely. For the first time that day, I wasn't trying to hold them back. My chest heaved with sobs that shook the car, every breath cutting deeper than the last. I cried until there was nothing left, until my body felt empty, drained, and fragile. When the tears slowed, I lifted my head, breathing unsteadily. The phone sat on the passenger seat, the voice note still open, ready to play again. I couldn't bear to hear it. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. The words were carved into me, already permanent scars I would carry no matter what came next. But as I sat there, broken and raw, I felt something stir under the wreckage, a thought faint but steady. I had seen them stripped bare, their lies torn open in front of everyone they wanted to impress. They had mocked me as naive, blind, too kind to ever fight back. And yet, even through the tears, I realized I wasn't finished. I wiped my cheeks, smeared and swollen, and whispered into the silence, "You will never laugh at me again." The words were shaky, but they held weight. I didn't know what came next, not yet, but I knew the path forward would not be theirs to control. And with that, I started the car, the engine humming like a fragile promise, and pulled away from the church, leaving behind the ruins of what should have been my wedding day. The drive home from the church felt endless, even though I barely remember the streets I turned on. My hands shook on the wheel, and the sound of my own breath filled the silence. Every stoplight felt like a pause between chapters, as if my life was split into before and after that veil lifted. When I finally parked outside my apartment, I didn't move. I sat there in the dim afternoon, my dress heavy around me, and let the weight of everything settle into my chest. The apartment was dark when I stepped inside. I dropped the bouquet still clutched in my hand, the flowers scattering across the floor, like they were just another casualty of the day. I peeled myself out of the dress, slowly careful with each zipper and button, as if rushing would break me further. By the time I collapsed onto the couch, I felt hollow, like my body had been emptied of whatever had carried me through the ceremony. I don't know how long I stayed there staring at the ceiling until the pounding at the door jolted me upright. It was late, the kind of late when neighbors would rather ignore noise than get involved. I opened the door, and there they were, Daniel red-faced and fuming, Tessa at his side with her makeup streaked, and behind them both sets of parents, their faces twisted in a mix of shame and fury. The air shifted the moment they crossed the threshold, like the walls themselves recoiled. Daniel lunged first, his voice sharp and shaking. "You humiliated me, Marina. You destroyed everything. That video needs to come down." His eyes darted to my phone on the coffee table like it was a weapon. I crossed my arms, steadying myself. I didn't post it, and even if I had, I wouldn't delete it. I didn't lie. "You did." Tessa's voice cracked, brittle with panic. "Then make whoever did take it down. Don't you care about what this is doing to us?" My laugh was short and bitter. "To you? After what you planned for me?" "No." Helen gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've disgraced us. This is defamation." I cut her off before she could continue, my voice sharp but calm. "Your son and my sister did this. Not me. I wasn't the one sneaking around. I wasn't the one plotting to drain a trust my grandmother left for me." The room fell quiet, but Daniel broke it with a smirk that chilled me. "Careful, Marina. If you keep this up, I'll tell everyone about your little problem." I raised an eyebrow. "My problem? The reason you could never keep me satisfied?" He sneered, his words dripping with venom meant to wound. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stiffened, my mother's eyes darting nervously, and Tessa shifted uneasily, as if she already suspected something was wrong. I leaned back against the wall, my smile cold and deliberate. "Oh, Daniel, you're confusing me with yourself. Those little blue pills in your cabinet, you told Tessa they were mine, didn't you?" Tessa's head whipped toward him. "What?" Daniel stuttered, his bravado slipping. It's not what you think." "Call him," I said softly, almost sweetly. "Ask him." With trembling hands, Tessa pulled out her phone, dialed, and placed it on speaker. The entire room held its breath. "Daniel," she said tightly, "Marina says those pills were yours. Is that true?" A long pause, stretched thin. Then his voice, muffled but guilty, answered, "Maybe you got confused." The line went dead. Tessa's face collapsed, her eyes glassy with realization. My father's jaw clenched, and for a moment no one spoke. Finally, Richard's voice broke the silence, low and threatening. "This isn't over. You'll regret what you've done." I stepped forward, locking eyes with him. "No. The only regret in this room belongs to Daniel, who thought he could scam his fiancé, and to Tessa, who thought betrayal would never come to light." They stormed out in a flurry of slammed doors and furious footsteps. When the apartment fell quiet again, I stood shaking, not from fear, but from the release of words I had swallowed for months. I thought the night would end there, but when I finally picked up my phone, the messages were already pouring in. 82 new notifications from the wedding planning group chat alone. Daniel had gone nuclear, hurling lie after lie into the void, claiming I was unfaithful, that I had been using him, that I had trapped him into the engagement. He accused me of debts I didn't have, of secret lives that didn't exist. But for once, the lies didn't land. Friends countered him instantly, some with laughter, others with facts. Victor was the first to respond, reminding everyone what they had actually seen that day. A bridesmaid followed with a screenshot of Daniel's slurred bragging at the bachelor party. And then the floodgates opened. Former girlfriends, co-workers, acquaintances, all with stories that mirrored mine. Piece by piece, the image he tried to spin unraveled, not because of me, but because of the history he had left behind. For the first time since the day began, I laughed. It wasn't joy, not yet, but the release of knowing I wasn't alone in carrying the truth. Daniel and Tessa had built their schemes on the belief that no one would speak, that shame would silence me. Instead, the world had already started speaking for me. But that laugh faded quickly, replaced with a quieter realization. They weren't finished. Daniel's pride, Tessa's desperation, my parents' denial. All of it promised more storms ahead. I knew the worst was not behind me, but waiting just out of sight. I leaned back against the couch, the dress crumpled in the corner, like the ghost of a life I had buried. My eyes burned, my throat ached, but deep inside, something had shifted. The pain hadn't left, but clarity had settled in its place. And in that clarity, I saw what came next. The morning after the ruined wedding, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The blinds were still drawn, and the apartment carried the faint smell of lilies from the discarded bouquet. Every muscle in my body ached, not from movement, but from holding myself upright while everything collapsed. The group chat from the night before kept buzzing on my phone, but I left it untouched. I needed stillness before I could face the next wave. Victor stopped by on his way to work. His scrubs wrinkled his eyes, heavy but watchful. He set down a paper bag with a muffin and another coffee, and for a moment, we didn't speak. When he finally broke the silence, his words were quiet. "You don't have to do this alone." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to answer. His presence was enough a steady reminder that someone believed me, that someone had chosen my side without hesitation. That day I told myself I wouldn't hide anymore. Daniel and Tessa had stripped me of dignity in private for months, and they thought they could bury the truth under charm and excuses. But I had already seen how quickly their lies unraveled when spoken aloud. I decided then that if they wanted to play in shadows, I would drag them into the light. I began small. I saved the messages, the recordings, every screenshot sent by friends who had witnessed pieces of Daniel's behavior. I forwarded them to my father, who didn't ask questions, only replied with one line: "Keep everything organized. We may need it." His calm steadiness steadied me too. 3 nights later, the first ripple of Daniel's downfall spread wider than I imagined. A local podcast, where he often bragged about his restaurants, invited him to speak, hoping to catch his side of the wedding debacle. I watched the live stream on my laptop, Victor sitting beside me with his arms crossed. The host didn't coddle him. "Your wedding video has millions of views. People are calling it the switch no one saw coming. Do you have anything to say?" Daniel smirked, leaning into the camera as if his charm would erase the images already burned into people's minds. He called it selective editing, insisted he was protecting me from a toxic relationship. Then the host cut him down with one sentence. Protecting her by sleeping with her sister, Daniel stammered, tugging at his collar. But the silence stretched until he admitted the truth. The clip spread online within hours, and by morning, reservations at his restaurants dropped sharply. Investors pulled out. For the first time, Daniel's empire wasn't fueled by charisma, but dragged down by it. Watching him falter on screen, I felt the faintest thread of relief. But if Daniel was unraveling, Tessa was clawing. She filed a lawsuit against Victor 2 days later, served to him at the hospital while he was on shift. When he called me, his voice shook with fury. They handed me the papers in the butterfly room marina. In front of children getting chemo. He read off the claims: invasion of privacy, emotional distress, fabricated stories. It was cruel in the way only desperation can be. I drove to the hospital that night, meeting him outside under the dim glow of the parking lot lights. His shoulders slumped, but his eyes still carried fire. "Don't let this scare you," I told him, though I was shaking myself. "It won't last. People know the truth now." He nodded, and in that moment, I realized I had shifted from the woman who wept in her car to someone who could stand in storms without collapsing. By the end of the week, Victor had more legal help than he knew what to do with. Lawyers reached out offering pro bono representation, determined to dismantle Tessa's claims. Within 2 days of hearings, the judge dismissed the case entirely, scolding her attorneys for wasting the court's time. Watching the relief on Victor's face when he called me with the news was the first moment I allowed myself to smile without bitterness. But not everyone wanted justice. My parents called for a family dinner, insisting that we sort this out like adults. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, the table was already set, steam rising from plates no one touched. Tessa sat with her arms folded, makeup layered too thick, while Daniel looked rehearsed in his apology, his expression soft enough to fool someone who didn't know him. My father cleared his throat. "Marina, your sister made a mistake. People forgive mistakes." His voice was heavy, as if he already doubted the words. My mother gave me a pleading look, urging me to let it go for the sake of peace. I leaned forward, my hands steady on the table. A mistake is spilling coffee or forgetting an appointment. What they did was 6 months of betrayal planned in detail, funded with my trust. "That's not a mistake. That's cruelty." Tessa flinched, but Daniel spoke quickly, trying to salvage something. "You could fix this, Marina. Tell people you forgive us. Help us rebuild our reputations. We're family." His tone cracked on the last word, as if even he didn't believe it. I shook my head slowly. "You were family. Past tense. You chose to break that." The silence after my words hung heavy, my mother burying her face in her hands, while my father pushed back from the table. Tessa's lips parted like she wanted to summon a memory, a shared moment to soften me. But I raised my hand to stop her. "Don't. You don't get to reminisce while I'm still bleeding from what you did." The dinner ended with untouched plates, the smell of food curling like smoke through the air, a reminder of what we lost. I drove home in silence, but instead of feeling broken, I felt sharper, clearer. I understood now that reconciliation wasn't possible, not with people who believed betrayal could be painted over with excuses. That night, I organized every piece of evidence into folders, physical and digital. I labeled them carefully, each one a reminder of what I refused to carry in silence. My quiet steps toward revenge weren't about screaming louder than them. They were about holding the truth steady until it crushed their lies. I didn't know then exactly how far it would go, or how many more lines they would cross trying to save themselves. But as I closed the last folder and set it on the desk, I knew one thing for certain. They underestimated me, and they wouldn't make that mistake again. The weeks after that family dinner brought no peace. Daniel and Tessa should have disappeared into silence, but arrogance doesn't quiet easily. Instead of retreating, they tried to twist the narrative further, grasping at whatever scraps of sympathy they could find. Their voices followed me even when I turned off my phone, the weight of their schemes pressing against me at work, in the grocery store, in every space I tried to reclaim. The worst came one Thursday morning when Victor called me during his shift. His voice was low, trembling, not with fear, but outrage. "They served me at the hospital, Marina. Right there in front of the children." I could hear the ache in him as he explained that Tessa had filed a lawsuit claiming invasion of privacy and emotional distress. The papers had been handed to him in the butterfly room, the very place where children sat for chemotherapy. Nurses had watched some in tears, horrified that anyone could bring such venom into a space meant for healing. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "She did this on purpose," I said quietly. "Not just to wound you, but to humiliate me through you." Victor let out a bitter laugh, heavy with exhaustion. "It won't hold, but it hurts, Marina." They knew it would. That night, the weight of guilt pressed on me harder than the betrayal ever had. Victor had chosen to tell me the truth, and now he was being dragged into their spiral. I couldn't undo his pain, but I promised myself I wouldn't let him carry it alone. By the next day, lawyers, some friends of my father, others who had seen the video online, were offering to represent him without charge. Within 48 hours, the case was dismissed, shredded by judges who saw it for the performance it was. Still, the cruelty of that moment stuck with me, a reminder of just how far my sister was willing to sink. And then came the night my parents summoned us all again. My mother called it an attempt to restore dignity, though I knew it was one last desperate attempt to hold the family together. The dinner table was too polished, the silverware lined with precision, as if order could disguise the fracture. Tessa arrived first, her eyes tired behind painted lashes. Daniel followed his expression, forced into contrition, though the smirk beneath never truly faded. I sat across from them, my father at the head of the table, his jaw set like stone. He began with careful words asking if there was a way to move forward. My mother added softly, "People forgive, Marina. Time softens wounds." I met her eyes, steady. Time doesn't erase theft, or betrayal, or the way they laughed while they planned to strip me of what Grandma left to protect me. Daniel leaned forward, his tone falsely gentle. "You could save us, Marina. If you tell people you forgive us, they'll stop. Investors will come back. The noise will die down." I shook my head slowly, my voice sharper now. "You don't need my forgiveness for your reputations. You need it for your souls, and I'm not the one who can give it." Tessa flinched at the words, her lips parting, as if to speak, but nothing came. My father finally spoke, his voice like gravel. "This dinner was meant to bring peace, but peace doesn't come from denial." He pushed back his chair and stood, leaving the room without another word. The silence that followed was heavy, the plates untouched, steam rising like ghosts of what should have been shared. I left soon after, the air thick with the realization that no amount of pretending could repair what had been broken. Days later, Richard and Helen appeared at my apartment unannounced. Richard's knock was heavy, insistent, the kind that demanded rather than asked. When I opened the door, he pushed his way inside, his wife clutching a folder against her chest. "We need to discuss the financial situation," Richard announced. I crossed my arms, exhaustion lacing my voice. "What financial situation?" "The wedding costs," Helen said quickly. "We paid deposits. The vendors expect full payment." "You need to take responsibility." I stared at them, stunned by the audacity. "Your son and my sister plotted to scam me for half a year, and you're asking me for money." Richard's face flushed as he snapped, "That doesn't negate the contracts." "Oh, but it does." I retrieved my laptop from the counter and opened the emails I had saved. 3 months ago, Tessa wrote to the florist, the caterer, the photographer, admitting this was all a sham. "That's fraud. Fraud voids contracts." Helen gasped softly, her grip tightening on the folder. Richard's voice rose sharp with rage. "You hacked her email." "No," I said evenly. "She used my laptop and never logged out. Everything's saved to my cloud. It's all evidence now." Before Richard could answer, another voice came from the doorway. My father, who had followed them, stepped inside. His presence filled the room with quiet authority. "Try it," he said coolly. "I'll represent Marina myself. You'll lose before you even file." The silence that followed was almost sweet. Richard sputtered, grabbed Helen's arm, and stormed out. The door slammed behind them, but the sound only confirmed what I already knew. Their empire of excuses was collapsing, and they were clawing at walls already falling in. Not long after, another blow came. A blog surfaced online under the title "My Truth: Surviving a Narcissistic Ex." It was Tessa's writing, thinly veiled, dripping with accusations that I had manipulated her, driven her into Daniel's arms, trapped her with fabricated recordings. At first, strangers whispered sympathy in the comments. Some called me cold. Others painted me as jealous, envious of a younger sister's glow. But the tide shifted quickly. Women who had dated Daniel before began posting their own stories, complete with dates and screenshots. Coworkers of Tessa revealed affairs with married bosses, manipulations that echoed the same patterns. Every accusation she lobbed was dismantled by proof, each blog entry buried beneath waves of truth. Within days, the site vanished, scrubbed in disgrace. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt instead was clarity. Their fight was no longer about saving reputations. It was about survival, about clinging to the only power they thought they had left. And in their desperation, they were showing the world exactly who they were. That night, I sat on my balcony, the cool air brushing my skin, and thought about the path I had taken. Exposure wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was steady, deliberate, the kind of truth that gnawed at lies until nothing remained. I wasn't finished yet, but for the first time, I could see the shape of their downfall clearly. And I knew the next step wouldn't come from me alone. It would come from the world, watching, finally seeing them without the masks they had worn for so long. The call from my grandmother came one evening, just as the sun was sinking, painting my apartment in soft gold. I half expected her voice to be sharp, scolding me for the spectacle at the church, but instead, she was laughing. "That's my smart girl," she said warmly. "Do you know why I wrote the trust the way I did?" I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my heart slowing as her words wrapped around me. "Because you didn't want me to marry too young, I guessed." She chuckled softly. "No, because I lived through this once already. Your grandfather tried the same trick in the 60s, helping your aunt's fiancé fake a marriage to unlock her inheritance. I swore none of my grandchildren would fall into that trap. That's why I added the 5-year clause. If a marriage ends before, then the money goes to charity." The truth settled over me like a cloak. Daniel's grand scheme had been doomed from the beginning. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had betrayed himself. My grandmother's voice softened. "Remember this, Marina. Blood doesn't make loyalty. Choice does." Her words sank deep, reminding me that family could be chosen, and betrayal could come from the people who shared your name. Days later, Daniel showed up at my workplace. He strode through the front doors as if nothing had changed, his shoulders squared though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. My manager nearly called security, but I stepped into the hallway to stop the scene from escalating. He cornered me near the elevators, his voice urgent. "This has gone too far. The restaurants are collapsing. Investors are walking away. You've destroyed us." I folded my arms steady despite the storm in his tone. "I didn't destroy anything." "You did. All I did was refuse to cover it up." His mouth tightened and he tried again. His arrogance cracked by desperation. "Say you forgive me. Tell people it was a misunderstanding. Help salvage what's left." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering his voice on that recording, the way he had laughed while calling me clueless. "No, Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't fix liars. I bury them." His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing left to say. Tessa came next. Weeks later, I stepped out of a coffee shop with a cup in hand, only to find her waiting by the curb. She looked smaller, makeup-smudged hair, unkempt, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Marina," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake." I studied her face, seeing not just my sister, but every choice she had made against me. "No, Tessa. A mistake is forgetting an appointment. You made a choice again and again for 6 months, and every time you chose betrayal." Her lips trembled. "Can't you forgive me? I already have," I said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation." "You're dead to me now." Her shoulders collapsed, her hand lifting as if to reach for me, but I stepped back. The space between us was wider than the street, a graveyard of trust neither of us could cross. Life moved on, but their shadows still lingered in corners. The scandal became a storm online, The video replayed until even talk shows dissected it. Daniel's restaurants bled customers' reviews, turning brutal investors vanishing one by one. He sold his Porsche, downsized his apartment, tried to reinvent himself as a motivational speaker online. The comments sections reminded him daily of what he had done. Tessa fared no better, unemployed, back in our parents' home, clinging to private posts filled with empty affirmations. Through it all, I felt a strange calm. Their downfall hadn't come from my hands alone. It had come from their own greed exposed to daylight. Still, I carried the ache, the bruise of betrayal that no justice could erase entirely. But for the first time, I understood that ache didn't mean weakness. It meant survival. One evening, I sat on the balcony with Victor. The city lights glittered like 1,000 watchful eyes. He asked gently, "Do you ever regret it, exposing them the way you did?" I thought about the chaos, the headlines, the whispers that had followed me through stores and sidewalks. Then I shook my head. They planned to humiliate me privately. I only moved up the timeline. If truth burns, let it burn in daylight. Victor smiled, something warm flickering in his eyes. That's why you survived this, Marina. You didn't just endure it, you owned it. His words lingered, a reminder that strength wasn't in hiding, but in standing. The world had seen who Daniel and Tessa really were. Their names no longer carried charm, only caution. And as their worlds collapsed, mine slowly began to steady. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was no longer broken either. What they thought would destroy me had only stripped them bare. And I knew deep down that the worst of their fall was still to come. The last time I saw Daniel and Tessa together was by accident. I had ducked into a coffee shop. I once loved the kind of place I'd avoided for months because whispers always followed me. They were seated by the window, hunched close, their faces drawn and pale. Tessa's mascara was smudged, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older than she was, while Daniel's shoulders sagged under a weight he couldn't charm away. They froze when they saw me. For a moment, Tessa's lips parted like she might apologize or plead, but I walked past them without slowing. My latte warmed my hands, and for once, neither of them tried to follow. That was when I knew the hold they had over me was gone. They could still whisper, still spin lies, but it didn't matter anymore. Their names carried nothing but ruin, while mine carried survival. I had spent months bracing against their shadows, but that day I realized I could step fully into the light. Victor was there for me in ways that required no announcements. He never tried to pull me faster than I was ready to go. He dropped off soup when I was sick, fixed the faucet that wouldn't stop dripping, left sticky notes on my door with words like, "You're stronger than you think." It wasn't romance that saved me. It was trust, quiet and steady. In his company, I learned what loyalty looked like when it was freely given, not bargained or betrayed. My grandmother called again, proud as ever, her voice crackling with warmth. She told me she had added a new clause to the trust, one she called the Tessa clause. Anyone who attempted fraud would be disinherited entirely. She laughed when she said it, but I could hear the steel underneath. Her way of making sure no one else in the family would ever try the same trick. My parents softened over time, too. My mother admitted she had been wrong to keep the peace at my expense, while my father told me he was proud that I had stayed calm when bitterness would have been easier. Hearing those words from him felt like closing a wound I didn't know I still carried. The noise around the scandal eventually quieted, though the smoke lingered. At first, I couldn't go anywhere without someone whispering, "That's her, the one from the wedding video." But slowly, the whispers faded into distance. The headlines turned to something else, and what remained was peace. Not the fragile peace of denial, but the kind built from truth. Daniel's empire collapsed piece by piece. 2 of his restaurants closed their doors, the third barely survived. He tried to reinvent himself online, offering advice about perseverance, but the comments always dragged him back to the truth. Maybe start with fidelity, they wrote. Tessa faded into the background too, posting empty affirmations on private accounts, living under my parents' roof with no job and no prospects. Their fall didn't bring me joy, but it brought balance. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just settles like dust when a storm finally breaks. As for me, I began living again. I cleared out the remnants of a wedding that never happened, boxes of decorations, a veil I couldn't look at. Victor helped me pack them, both of us, laughing at the absurdity of what we once thought was sacred. One night, as we carried the last box to the curb, he smiled and said, "If we ever do this for real, your cousin still insists on being best man." I smirked and answered, "Then my maid of honor gets dibs." We both laughed light and unburdened. It wasn't a promise, but it was hope. Looking back, I see the story differently than I lived it. At the time, it felt like betrayal had torn my life apart, but now I know it rebuilt me instead. Some betrayals cut you down so you can't stand, but others clear away what never belonged. I learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion, and strength doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means standing quietly, refusing to be silenced, and letting truth do its work. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is that dignity is not something others can give or take. It's something you hold even when others try to strip it from you. Betrayal may bruise, but it also reveals who was with you, who was against you, and who stood silently but steady when the storm came. And in the end, I stood taller, not because of what they tried to do to me, but because of what I refused to let them take. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke to you most. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, you're always welcome here.